It started on a Tuesday, September 14th. The kind of late summer day that feels like it's holding its breath. The sky was a hard porcelain blue, not a cloud in it. Visibility was perfect. I could see all the way to Mount Rainier in the south, a white, jagged tooth biting into the horizon. I remember the morning routine perfectly. I cling to that routine now. I replay it in my head because it makes sense. It followed rules. I woke up at 05:30. I made coffee in the percolator on the propane stove, dark roast, bitter, hot enough to scald. I stood on the catwalk that wraps around the cabin, looking out over 300,000 acres of ponderosa pine and Douglas fir. The air smelled of pine resin and dry dirt. It smelled clean. That's the last time I remember the world smelling clean. I went back inside and checked in with dispatch. That was the job. Every morning at 08, you key the mic on the Bendix King radio and you tell the world you're still there. Dispatch, this is Blackwood Tower, 10-8, skies clear. Wind 5 miles per hour from the northwest. Temp is 58 degrees. And Sarah, the dispatcher down in the Valley Station, 30 miles away, would crackle back. Copy that, Blackwood. Have a good one, Elias. Don't work too hard. It was a joke we had. You don't work in a fire tower. Not really. You exist. You watch. You wait for a plume of smoke, and then you use the Osborne Firefinder, this big circular topographic map table in the center of the room with a sighting ring, to triangulate the coordinates. It's geometry. It's precise. I liked the precision. But that Tuesday, there was no smoke. There was just the pollen. Around 10 a.m., I noticed a haze settling in the lower valley, down near the Snake River Basin. At first, I thought it was morning fog that hadn't burned off yet, or maybe smog drifting in from the wildfires over in Oregon. I grabbed my binoculars, Nikon 10x50s, heavy rubberized coating, good glass. I focused the lenses. The haze wasn't white or gray. It was yellow, a sickly, vibrant sulfur yellow, like bruised skin. And it wasn't drifting with the wind. It was rising. It looked like the forest floor was exhaling. I watched it for an hour. It was mesmerizing in a wrong kind of way. It moved fast, climbing the elevation lines on the map like water filling a bathtub. By noon, the birds stopped singing. That should have been my first real warning. You get used to the birds up here. The Steller's jays are aggressive, loud. The ravens croak back and forth constantly. But at noon, it was like someone threw a heavy wool blanket over the world. The silence, it wasn't the good silence anymore. It was expectant. I went to the radio. I figured I should mention the haze to Sarah, just in case it was some kind of chemical spill. A tanker truck overturning on the highway, maybe. I keyed the mic. The plastic felt greasy in my hand. It was getting humid, unseasonably humid, very quickly. The windows of the tower, usually crystal clear, were starting to fog up on the outside. Dispatch, this is Blackwood. You reading me? Static. Not the clean white noise of an open channel, but a wet, garbled sound, like interference, but rhythmic. Thump, hiss, thump, hiss. Dispatch, Blackwood. Do you have eyes on the valley floor? I'm seeing a heavy yellow particulate matter rising from the basin. Visibility is dropping rapidly. Over. Nothing. I adjusted the squelch. I checked my battery connection. The radio was solar-powered. Batteries were full. I tried the emergency channel. Then I heard it. It wasn't Sarah. It was a sound I can only describe as tearing, like wet fabric being ripped apart, amplified 1,000 times. And underneath that, a voice. It sounded like Sarah, but it was all wrong. It was too high, too breathless. Eyes. It's in my eyes. The flowers. Elias, the flowers are breathing. Sarah? Sarah, come in. What's happening? Don't breathe it. Oh God, don't breathe it. It grows inside. The transmission cut with a sound that I still have nightmares about. It was a wet crunch, followed by the squeal of feedback, and then the line went dead. Not static, dead air. The carrier wave was gone. I stood there in the center of my glass box, gripping the microphone until my knuckles turned white. I looked out the window. The yellow fog had reached the tree line below the ridge, and where the fog touched, the forest was changing. I need you to understand something. I'm an engineer. I understand loads, tension, compression. I understand the speed at which things happen in the physical world. Concrete cures at a specific rate. Steel expands with heat at a specific rate. Plants grow at a specific rate. What I saw defied physics. Through the binoculars, I watched a 100-foot-tall Douglas fir turn purple. It wasn't a trick of the light. Moss, thick and violet and pulsating, was racing up the trunk. It moved like a fast-forward video. I could see the branches shuddering. Leaves exploded outward, but they weren't pine needles anymore. They were broad, fleshy sheets, translucent and veined with red. Vines, thick as my thigh, erupted from the forest floor, spiraling up the trees, constricting them, crushing them. I heard the sound of timber snapping, crack, 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 echoing up the canyon like rifle shots. It was coming up the mountain. It was climbing toward me. Panic is a strange chemical. In the city, panic makes you freeze or run blindly. Up here, alone, panic clarifies things. It strips away the unnecessary. I looked at the speed of the ascent. Based on the topographic lines, the bloom, that's what I called it then, was moving at about 400 feet of elevation per hour. My tower is at 6,400 feet. The fog was at 4,000. I had 6 hours, maybe less. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't try to run. Where would I go? The only road down, a 6-mile dirt logging track, led straight into the fog. If I took my Jeep, I'd be driving directly into the throat of whatever that was.
My only advantage was altitude. I had to secure the tower. I went into survival mode. I started inventorying. This is what you do when the world ends. You count cans of beans. Water. I had a 50-gallon gravity tank on the catwalk, plus 3 cases of bottled water inside. Food. Canned goods for 2 weeks. Rice. Dried pasta. A few MREs left over from the last ranger drop. Fuel. 2 20-pound propane tanks for the stove and heater. Weapons. A flare gun, a hatchet, a KA bar knife, and a Winchester Model 70 rifle, .306 caliber, kept in a locked gun safe under the bed. It was for bears or cougars. I grabbed the key and unlocked it. 5 rounds in the magazine, 1 box of 20 in the drawer. I locked the heavy steel door at the top of the stairs. The tower itself is basically a steel skeleton, 4 legs cross-braced with steel cables, topped with the 14 by 14-foot cabin. The stairs are open grate steel, winding up the center. I went out onto the catwalk to pull up the storm shutters. These are heavy wooden panels that hinge down to cover the glass in case of severe hail or high winds. I dropped them on 3 sides, north, west, and south. I left the east side open. That was the side facing away from the valley, facing the high granite peaks. I needed to see. By 4 p.m., the smell arrived. It wasn't just pine anymore. It was sweet, sickeningly sweet, like rotting lilies and copper. It was heavy, oily. I could taste it on the back of my throat. It made my eyes water. I tore strips off an old t-shirt and soaked them in water, tying them around my face. It didn't help much, but it made me feel like I was doing something. At 5:30 p.m., the sun began to dip behind the ridge. Usually, sunset up here is a religious experience. Oranges, pinks, deep purples. Tonight, the sunset was wrong. The light hitting the yellow fog turned the world a bruised hematoma red, and I saw the first of them. I was looking down through the steel grating of the catwalk, watching the tree line directly below the tower base. The trees down there were still green, but the ground cover was twitching. Ferns were thrashing around as if caught in a wind that I couldn't feel. Then, something broke from the cover of the trees. It was a deer, a buck, a big mule deer with a wide rack of antlers. It stumbled into the clearing around the base of the tower, but it wasn't moving right. Its legs were stiff, jerky. It was galloping sideways. I raised the binoculars. The buck was overgrown. That's the only word. Where its fur should have been, there were patches of vibrant, pulsating moss. One of its antlers was gone, replaced by a twisting, spiraling vine that looked like it had drilled into the skull and burst out. Its eyes were gone. The sockets were filled with clusters of small, white mushrooms. It wasn't running away from something. It was hunting. It slammed its head into one of the concrete footings of my tower. Thud. Then again, thud. It didn't seem to feel pain. It let out a sound, not a bleat, but a wet, gurgling wheeze. Then, the ground behind it erupted. Vines shot out of the earth like striking cobras. They wrapped around the buck's legs. I watched, paralyzed, as the animal was pulled down. It didn't fight. It didn't kick. It just melted. The vegetation swarmed over it. Within seconds, the shape of the deer was gone, replaced by a mound of writhing green and violet. The assimilation was instantaneous. I backed away from the railing, stumbling into the cabin. I slammed the deadbolt and checked the windows. The east side was still exposed. I looked out. The fog was at 5,500 feet. It was rising faster as the air cooled. The darkness was rising with it. I sat on the floor, my back against the Osborne firefinder, the rifle across my lap. I turned off the propane lantern. I didn't want to be a beacon. I sat in the dark, listening. You know, structural engineers think about failure points. We calculate the load capacity. We ask, how much weight can this beam hold before it buckles? My tower was built in the 1950s, galvanized steel. It was designed to withstand 100-mile-per-hour winds, heavy snow loads, even minor earthquakes. But it wasn't designed for this. Night fell completely around 8 p.m. But it wasn't dark. A glow started to permeate the cabin. I crawled to the window and peeked over the sill. The forest below was bioluminescent. The yellow fog glowed with a faint, sickly phosphorescence. The vines that were strangling the trees pulsed with a rhythmic blue light, like veins pumping neon blood. It was beautiful. It was the most terrifying thing I have ever seen. And then the sounds began. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Metal against metal. I held my breath. It was coming from below, from the stairs. Something was climbing the tower. It wasn't the wind. Wind doesn't have a cadence. This was rhythmic. Step, drag, step, drag. I stood up, moving as silently as I could to the door. There's a small viewing port in the steel door, a heavy glass circle about 3 inches wide. I pressed my eye to it, looking down into the stairwell cage. The glow from the forest below cast long, twisted shadows up through the great steps. At first, I saw nothing, just the zigzag of the steel stairs. Then, on the landing 20 feet down, a hand. It gripped the railing, but the fingers were too long. They were fused together. The skin was gray and bark-like. My heart stopped. I knew that shirt. It was Jim, the ranger who did the supply run 2 weeks ago. He was a big guy, ex-military, loud laugh. Jim looked up. His face was a bloom of coral-colored fungus. His jaw hung unhinged, slack, distended to impossible proportions. And from his mouth, a single long vine drooped like a probing tongue, tasting the air. He saw me, or the fungus saw me. He let out a shriek, a high-pitched tea kettle sound that vibrated the steel floor plates under my feet. Screech! And then he started to run, up the stairs, toward the door. I scrambled back, raising the Winchester. I aimed at the door. The steel was thick, but the glass port wasn't. Slam! The body hit the door. The whole cabin shook. Slam! Open! The voice was gurgling, wet. Elias, open! It's warm inside! Get back! I shouted, my voice cracked. Get back or I shoot! Slam! The glass in the viewing port spiderwebbed. I didn't wait. I pulled the trigger. Sound effect. A deafening gunshot in a confined space. High-pitched ringing. The recoil dug into my shoulder. The glass port exploded outwards. The round took Jim, or the thing that was Jim, right in the center of what used to be his chest. There was no scream, just the sound of wet meat hitting metal. I heard a tumbling noise, a clatter of limbs against the railing, and then a heavy thud on the landing below. I cycled the bolt. Clack, clack. A fresh round chambered. My ears were ringing so loud I could barely think. I crept back to the shattered port. Jim was lying on the landing in a heap, but he wasn't dead. The fungus on his chest was knitting together, fibers reaching out to bridge the bullet hole. He was twitching. And below him, further down the stairs, I saw more movement. Shadows. Dozens of them, drawn by the gunshot. They were coming up. I looked at the window. The yellow fog was swirling around the catwalk now. I was trapped. 6,400 feet in the air, inside a glass box, with an army of moss-covered nightmares climbing the stairs and a toxic ocean rising to meet me. I checked my watch. 9:15 p.m. Day 1. I sat down with my back against the door, rifle across my knees, and I waited for the scratching to start again. It didn't take long.
You don't sleep in a siege. You drift. You enter this fugue state where your eyes are open, but your brain is trying to shut down the processing centers to save energy. I sat against that door for 6 hours. My back was numb, my legs were cramping, every muscle fiber was pulled tight, waiting for the next impact, waiting for the lock to shear or the hinges to buckle. But the impacts stopped. That was almost worse. Instead of trying to batter the door down, they settled. I could hear them on the catwalk outside. The grate is steel mesh, it clangs when you walk on it. But they weren't walking anymore. They were shuffling, dragging. I heard wet, slapping sounds against the storm shutters I'd lowered, like someone throwing handfuls of wet clay against a wall. Splat, splat, slap, squeeze. At one point, around 3 a.m., a finger, or what used to be a finger, poked through the bullet hole in the glass viewing port. It was pale, stripped of skin, just raw muscle and white fungal threads. It wiggled there, blindly exploring the jagged edges of the broken glass. It wasn't trying to unlock the door, it was just feeling. I didn't shoot it. I didn't want to waste the ammo. I just watched it. Eventually, it retracted, pulling back with a sickening squelch. The smell inside the cabin was changing. The storm shutters were down, the door was sealed, but air still gets in. These towers aren't hermetically sealed submarines, they're drafty boxes in the sky. The sweetness was turning sour. It smelled like fermentation now, like a compost heap heating up in the sun. And I realized the yellow fog, the spores, the pollen, whatever you want to call it, was getting in. I grabbed a roll of silver duct tape from the tool chest. I went to every window seam, every crack in the floorboards, the gap under the door. I taped them shut, layer after layer. It felt futile. If this stuff was microscopic, tape wasn't going to stop it. But it gave my hands something to do. It kept me from thinking about Jim regenerating on the stairs. Then, the tower spoke. Structural steel talks. It tells you when it's cold, when it's hot, when it's under load. But this sound was new. It was a groan of compression, the sound of metal being squeezed. I put my hand on the floor. I could feel a vibration. Not the wind. It was coming from the legs of the tower. Something was climbing the supports, and it was heavy. Or maybe it was constricting. I stayed in the center of the room, away from the walls, away from the door. I checked the Winchester again. 4 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber, 19 in the box, 24 chances. I must have passed out, or maybe I just blinked for a long time, because suddenly the light changed. Dawn, day 2, September 15th. There was no sun. Not really. The light filtering through the gaps in the storm shutters was a sickly, bruised purple. I stood up.
My joints popped. I was dehydrated. My tongue felt like a piece of dry felt in my mouth. I cracked a bottle of water and downed it in one go. I needed to see. I needed to know what the world looked like. The storm shutters on the north, west, and south were down, but the east side, the side facing the peaks, the side I hadn't covered, was exposed glass. I walked toward it. The glass was obscured. It looked like frost, but it was fuzzy. Mold. An intricate lace-like pattern of white and gray mold was growing across the window pane on the outside. It was beautiful in a geometric way, fractals of decay blocking out the view. I used the butt of the rifle to scrape a small circle of frost away from the inside, trying to see through the mold on the outside. I gasped. I couldn't help it. The world was gone. Yesterday, this had been a forest of green pines and gray granite. Today, it was a coral reef. The trees were unrecognizable. They were swaddled in thick, fleshy webbing. Massive blooms, the size of cars, hung from the branches, dripping a thick neon yellow nectar. The ground was a carpet of red moss that seemed to ripple, even though there was no wind. And the fog. The yellow fog had risen. It was level with the catwalk now. The tower was an island in a sea of sulfur. But the worst part was the tower legs. I pressed my face against the cold glass, looking down at the structural supports. Vines. Thick, woody vines, dark as old blood, had spiraled up the steel legs. They were as thick as tree trunks. They wrapped around the cross bracing, knotting themselves into tight clumps. I saw where that groaning sound had come from. 20 feet down, one of the steel crossbeams, a piece of metal 6 inches thick, was bent inward, bowed inward. The vine had wrapped around it and tightened as it grew, like a boa constrictor crushing a rib cage. Snap. I watched a bolt, a steel rivet the size of my fist, pop out of the frame and plummet into the fog.
The tower wasn't just being climbed, it was being dismantled. I pulled away from the window. My engineering brain started doing the math I didn't want to do. The tower is designed for vertical load, gravity pushing down. It is decent at handling lateral load, wind pushing sideways. It is not designed to be squeezed. It is not designed to support the weight of tons of wet, heavy biomass clinging to the frame. "It's going to come down," I whispered. My voice sounded foreign in the quiet room. "It's going to fold." I looked at the door. The infected, the hosts, I guess I should call them, were still out there. I could hear the wet breathing. I was trapped between a structural collapse and a biological nightmare. I needed a plan. Panic was trying to claw its way back up my throat, but I swallowed it down with another sip of water. Plan the work, work the plan. That's what my old foreman used to say. Step 1, assessment. I needed to know exactly what was outside that door. I went to the wall where the fire tools were mounted. I grabbed a polished steel mirror, usually used for signaling aircraft. I slid it flat along the floor, toward the gap under the door. The gap was taped, but I peeled back a corner. The smell hit me instantly, rotten meat and sweet perfume. I gagged, holding my breath, and slid the mirror halfway out into the gap, angling it so I could see up the stairs and onto the catwalk. The reflection was dark, distorted by the steel mesh floor. They were there. 3 of them on the catwalk directly in front of the door. They were huddled together, motionless. They had changed overnight. Yesterday, Jim had looked like a man with fungus on him. Today, the figures on the catwalk looked like statues made of wet clay and leaves. They were fusing. Their skin had hardened into a bark-like shell. And they were rooted. I adjusted the mirror. I saw tendrils growing out of their feet, weaving into the steel grate of the catwalk. They weren't waiting to get in anymore. They were becoming part of the structure. This gave me a flicker of hope. If they were rooted, maybe they couldn't move fast. Maybe they were dormant. I pulled the mirror back and resealed the tape. Step 2, communication.
I went back to the radio, the Bendix King. The battery light was blinking red. The solar panel on the roof was probably covered in moss. I had maybe an hour of juice left. I scanned the frequencies. Forest Service channel? Dead. Emergency channel? Static. Then I tried the AM bands. Sometimes, late at night, you can pick up commercial radio stations from Spokane or Seattle if the atmospheric skip is right. I turned the dial slowly. Hiss, hiss, pop. Then a voice. I repeat, the quarantine zone has failed. Do not attempt to reach the cities. The vectors are airborne. If you are in a structure, seal it. If you are... It was a looped recording, a synthesized automated voice. Safe zones are established at Fairchild Air Force Base, and... Static swallowed the name. I frantically tuned the dial back and forth. Come on, come on. Fairchild. Base. Elevation is safety. The Verdance does not thrive above 8,000 feet. Repeat, seek altitude. The Verdance slows in cold/high altitude environments. The signal died. The battery light turned solid red, then faded to black. I sat back, processing. Fairchild. That was 100 miles away. Impossible. But the second part, seek altitude. The Verdance slows above 8,000 feet. I looked at my topographic map. My tower was at 6,400. To the east, the granite peaks of the Cascades rose up. Mount Rainier was too far, but closer. Blackwood Peak. The summit was 8,200. It was raw granite, above the tree line. No soil for the plants to take root in, just rock and snow. If the recording was right, the Verdance, that name stuck in my head immediately, couldn't grow there. It was too cold, the air too thin, the rock too barren. But to get there, I had to go down. I had to descend 60 feet of steel stairs covered in infected monsters, cross 6 miles of alien jungle, and climb 2,000 feet of vertical elevation. I looked at the floor. The vibration was getting worse. The groaning of the metal was constant now. The tower was trembling like a feverish child. I grabbed my pack, a sturdy canvas rucksack. I started loading it, fast. Water bottles, 4 of them, heavy but necessary. The jerky, the dried pasta, useless without boiling water. I tossed it aside. The flare gun, the hatchet, a coil of climbing rope, 100 feet of static line I used for hauling gear up the pulley system. I looked at the gun safe. There was a box of shotgun shells in there, but I didn't have a shotgun, just the rifle. I took the last box of 30-06. I was ready, or as ready as I would ever be. But how to leave? The door was a choke point. The stairs were clogged with the rooted bodies of the infected. If I opened that door, I'd have to hack my way through them. And if I touched them, if I breathed the spores they released when I cut them. I looked at the windows again. The catwalk was compromised, but the pulley system. On the west side of the tower, there's a heavy-duty winch and a steel boom arm. We use it to haul up propane tanks and heavy water jugs so we don't have to carry them up the stairs. The boom extends 5 feet out from the catwalk railing. The cable drops straight down to the concrete pad at the base. If I could hook my climbing harness to the cable and lower myself down, I could bypass the stairs entirely. But the winch was outside, on the catwalk, past the storm shutters. I looked at the west wall. The storm shutters were wood, heavy plywood. I couldn't open them from the inside without lifting the latch outside. My only exit was through the wall itself. I picked up the fire axe, the heavy red-handled Pulaski tool mounted on the wall. One side an axe blade, the other a digging adze. Engineering. Find the weak point.
The weak point wasn't the steel door, it was the floor. The floor of the cabin is wood planks over steel beams, but under the Osborne fire finder in the center of the room, there's a maintenance hatch, a trap door that leads nowhere. It just opens to the air below the cabin, used for inspecting the underside of the floor joists. If I opened that hatch, I would be looking straight down at a 60-foot drop, but I would also be underneath the catwalk. I moved the heavy map table. It screeched against the floorboards. I knelt down and found the flush-mounted ring pull for the hatch. It was painted over, stuck. I jammed the blade of the Pulaski into the seam and pried. Creak! Crack! The paint seal broke. I lifted the hatch, and the smell rushed up at me. It was intense enough to make my eyes water instantly. I adjusted the rag over my face, tying it tighter. I looked down. I was staring into the abyss. The yellow fog swirled below my boots. Through the gaps in the fog, I could see the massive dark vines wrapping the tower legs. They were pulsating, tightening. I tied one end of my climbing rope to the base of the Osborne firefinder. It was bolted to the frame, the solidest thing in the room. I tied the other end to my climbing harness. My plan was to rappel out of the hatch, swing under the cabin, and rappel all the way to the ground, avoiding the stairs, avoiding the door. I threw the coil of rope through the hatch. It unspooled into the yellow mist. I sat on the edge of the hole. My legs dangled in the open air. Don't look down, I told myself. Just look at the rope. I eased myself off the ledge. My weight took the rope. The harness dug into my thighs. I hung suspended in the air, underneath the floor of my home, dangling 60 feet above a planetary biological digestive system. I looked up at the underside of the catwalk, and that's when I saw the problem. The catwalk grate wasn't empty underneath. Roots, white, fleshy roots were growing through the metal mesh from the feet of the infected standing above. They hung down like stalactites, dripping slime. And as I swung there, suspended, the roots turned. They sensed the movement. They sensed the heat. The white tendrils began to elongate, reaching toward me, reaching toward the rope. I began to lower myself, fast, too fast. The rope burned through my gloves. Hiss! A drop of the slime from the roots hit my shoulder. It sizzled. It was acidic. It burned right through my flannel shirt and stung my skin like a hornet's sting. I gritted my teeth and kicked off one of the tower legs, swinging out into the open air, away from the underside of the cabin. I was descending into the fog. The yellow mist swallowed my boots, then my waist, then my head. Visibility dropped to 0. I was blind. I kept descending, 10 feet, 20 feet. Something brushed against my leg, something hard. I kicked out. My boot connected with... and a branch? No, it felt like ribs. I stopped. I hung there in the yellow soup, spinning slowly. A face drifted out of the fog, inches from mine. It was hanging from the tower crossbeams by vines wrapped around its neck. It was a hiker, hiking gear, North Face jacket, but the face was hollowed out. A bird, a mutated 4-winged thing with a beak like a syringe, had nested in the open chest cavity. The bird screeched and flew at me, pecking at my eyes. "Get off! Get off!" I flailed, spinning wildly on the rope. The bird clawed at my mask, trying to tear the fabric. I let go of the brake hand on the rope to swat it away. Mistake. I plummeted. The rope whizzed through my descender. I clamped my hand back down, burning my palm, jerking to a halt just 10 feet above the ground. I hung there, panting. The bird was gone. I looked down. The ground wasn't dirt anymore. It was a pulsating carpet of red moss. And standing directly below me, looking up with empty mushroom-filled sockets, was the buck, the deer I had seen yesterday. It was still here. It had waited. Its antlers were massive now, a crown of thorns and bone. It opened its mouth, and that wet, gurgling sound washed over me. I unslung the Winchester from my back. Hanging upside down, spinning in the fog, I tried to aim. This was the new world. Welcome to the jungle. Newton's third law says that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. In a structural system, this is about equilibrium. When you fire a 30-06 rifle while hanging one-handed from a spinning climbing rope 10 feet in the air, equilibrium goes out the window. I didn't have a clean sight picture. The buck, that mockery of a deer, reared up on its hind legs. The vines replacing its front limbs lashed out like whips. They weren't trying to hit me, they were trying to catch me, to pull me down into the red moss. I squeezed the trigger. The ground compressed under my weight, warm and spongy, and released a hiss of gas. I unclipped the carabiner from my harness. Click. Move, I told myself. Move or die. The buck was thrashing 5 yards away, trying to reorient itself. Its white mushroom-filled eyes couldn't see, but the vines on its head were weaving back and forth, sensing the vibration of my landing. I sprinted, not toward the road, but toward the Jeep. My 1998 Cherokee was parked under a corrugated metal carport about 50 feet from the tower base. It was my lifeboat. Solid steel, four-wheel drive, sealed windows. If I could get inside, I could just drive over everything. I ran through the yellow fog. Visibility was maybe 15 feet. I was coughing even through the wet rag. The air tasted like copper pennies. I reached the carport. No, I whispered. No, no, no. The carport had collapsed. A massive hemlock tree, strangled by the vines, had fallen directly onto the metal roof. But that wasn't the worst part. The Jeep was being digested. The tires were gone, dissolved into black sludge. Roots had grown into the wheel wells, punching through the steel body panels like they were tin foil. The windshield was shattered from the inside out. Ferns were pressing against the glass, filling the cabin. The vehicle wasn't a car anymore. It was a planter box. My escape route was gone. My armor was gone. Behind me, I heard the buck shriek again, closer. I turned and ran toward the logging road. The road, Forest Service Road 410, is a wide gravel track. Or it was. Now it was a tunnel. The trees on either side had leaned inward, their branches interlocking overhead to form a dense woven canopy. It blocked out the sky completely. It was dark in there, bioluminescent dark. I clicked on my headlamp. The beam cut through the yellow fog, illuminating swirling dust motes. I ran for maybe a mile. The adrenaline was the only thing keeping my legs moving. The air was so thick with humidity, it felt like swimming. Eventually, my lungs burned too much. I slowed to a jog, then a walk. I found a large rock outcrop on the side of the road, granite, mostly free of moss, and leaned against it, gasping. I checked my watch. 10:45 a.m. It looked like midnight. I took a sip of water. I tried to listen. The forest floor is usually a quiet place, but the Verdance was noisy. I could hear things growing. That's the only way to describe it. The wet pop of seed pods bursting, the grind of roots displacing rocks. And underneath it all, a sound like whispering. Not words, just phonetics, syllables being tested. Shar, ka, la. I shook my head violently. Don't listen to it, Elias. It's just the wind in the leaves.
But there was no wind. I pushed off the rock. I had to keep moving. The plan was still the same. Get to Blackwood Peak. But to get to the trailhead for the peak, I had to follow this road for another 4 miles to the intersection. As I walked, I started to notice the details of the transformation. The plants weren't random. An engineer looks for patterns. I saw geometry in the chaos. The vines wrapped trees in perfect helical spirals, maximizing structural integrity. The moss on the ground grew in hexagonal patches, honeycomb structures. This wasn't cancer. This was architecture. Whatever this intelligence was, it knew how to build. Around mile 3, I smelled something new. Gasoline and smoke. Not wood smoke, chemical smoke, burning plastic. I slowed down, raising the rifle. I crept forward, sticking to the edge of the road where the shadows were deepest. Ahead, the tunnel of trees opened up slightly. I saw a shape in the fog, blocky, yellow. It was a bulldozer, a Cat D9, one of the big ones used for maintaining the fire breaks. It was sitting sideways across the road. The engine was dead, but the exhaust stack was still warm, sending a thin ribbon of black smoke into the yellow mist. I approached it slowly. "Hello," I whispered. "Is anyone there?" No answer. I circled to the cab. The door was open. The interior was wet. There was no driver, but the seat was covered in a thick, translucent slime, and on the floorboards I saw a boot, just one boot, work leather, steel toe. The laces were still tied, but the foot inside was gone. I looked closer at the controls. The radio handset was hanging by its cord, swaying slightly. Then I saw the map. Pinned to the dashboard was a laminated map of the sector. Someone had written on it with grease pencil, big, frantic letters. "It's in the water." I stared at the words. "It's in the water." My hand went instinctively to the Nalgene bottle on my belt. I had filled it from the gravity tank at the tower before the fog rose. That water was pumped up from the deep well weeks ago. It should be safe. But what about the streams? What about the reservoirs? If the spore load was heavy enough to taint the groundwater? Then a clank from the back of the bulldozer, like a tool dropping. I spun around, rifle shouldered. "Come out," I hissed. Movement behind the massive rear ripper blade of the dozer. A figure stepped out. It wasn't a monster. It was a man. He was wearing a high-vis vest and a hard hat. He looked terrified. He was holding a wrench like a club. "Don't shoot," he croaked. His voice was raw, scratchy. "Drop the wrench," I ordered. I didn't lower the rifle. "Who are you?" The man dropped the tool. Clang. He raised his hands. They were shaking violently. He was young, maybe 20. I'm Kevin. I'm with the road crew. We were trying to clear the slide." "Where's the rest of your crew, Kevin?" Kevin's eyes darted to the forest on the left. His pupils were dilated, huge. They drank from the creek yesterday. They got thirsty. They said the water tasted sweet." He swallowed hard. "Then they started changing. They walked into the woods. They just walked in. They said they could hear the music." "Music?" I stepped closer, keeping the barrel pointed at his chest. "Let me see your eyes, Kevin." "I didn't drink it, I swear. I only had Monster in cans." He looked clean. No fungus on his skin, no moss in his ears, just sweat and dirt. I lowered the rifle slightly. Okay, Kevin. I'm Elias. I was the lookout at Tower 4. Kevin looked at me like an angel. "The tower? You came down? Is help coming?" "No," I said. "No help is coming. We have to get to Blackwood Peak, above the tree line. The radio said the infection slows down at altitude." Kevin nodded frantically. Okay, yeah, up is good, but we can't go up the road." "Why not?" "Because of the bear," he whispered. I paused. "A bear?" Not a bear, the bear." He gestured up the road with a trembling hand. "It's sitting on the bridge, the one over Copper Creek. It's guarding it, man. It won't let us pass." My engineering brain clicked. The Copper Creek Bridge was the only way across the ravine for 5 miles. If we couldn't cross that bridge, we couldn't get to the trailhead. "What does it look like, Kevin?" Kevin shuddered. "It looks like the mountain decided to walk." I looked at the kid. He was a liability. He was panicked, untrained, but he was human, and in a world rapidly turning into a compost heap, that counted for something. "Do you have a weapon?" I asked. He pointed to the wrench on the ground.
"Better than nothing," I said. "Pick it up. We're going to the bridge." "Are you crazy? I told you, We don't have a choice, Kevin. The fog is rising. If we stay here, we turn into fertilizer. We go to the bridge and we assess. If we can't kill it, we go around it. But we move, now." Kevin hesitated, then grabbed the wrench. He looked at me, and for a second I saw a spark of something other than fear. Hope, maybe.
Or maybe just the realization that following the guy with the gun was his best bet. We started walking up the road, leaving the safety of the bulldozer behind. The fog seemed to get thicker as we approached the creek. The sound of water rushing grew louder. And then I smelled it. Not gasoline, not pine. Musk. Heavy, wet animal musk. And honey. "Stay low," I whispered. We crouched behind a fallen log at the edge of the clearing. The bridge was ahead, an old wooden trestle bridge spanning a 50-foot drop into the creek. And sitting in the middle of the bridge was the Guardian. Kevin hadn't exaggerated. It was a black bear originally, but the Verdance had turned it into a siege engine. It was massive, at least 10 feet tall on its hind legs. Its fur was matted with glowing blue lichen. Its back was covered in hard, chitinous plates that looked like tree bark armor. But the most terrifying part was its stomach. The bear's abdomen had split open, revealing a glowing, amber-colored sac. Inside the sac, I could see movement, shadows swirling. It was a hive. The bear was a mobile hive for something else. It sat there on its haunches, blocking the narrow bridge, swaying back and forth. It was chuffing, a low, resonant sound that shook the leaves around us. I looked at the bridge. I looked at the ravine. I looked at the bear. "Okay," I whispered to myself. "Structural analysis. The bridge is wood. Wood burns." I looked at Kevin. "Do you have a lighter?" He patted his pockets. "Yeah, I smoke, or I did." "Give it to me." I looked back at the bulldozer in the distance behind us, then at the bear. "Kevin," I said, "I need you to do something very brave and very stupid." "I don't like stupid," Kevin whimpered. "We can't fight that thing, but we can remove the ground it's standing on. We need fuel. We need to siphon diesel from that dozer. And then, I said, checking the action on my rifle, "we're going to burn the bridge."
Diesel tastes like oil and dirt. It coats your tongue in a film that you can't spit out. It burns the gums. I was on my knees beside the Caterpillar D9, sucking on a length of plastic tubing I'd cut from the windshield washer fluid line. I had the other end jammed into the dozer's fuel tank. Glug, glug, glug. The amber liquid flowed into the glass bottle Kevin was holding. It was a beer bottle, Rolling Rock. We'd found a 12-pack of empties in the cab behind the seat. Road crew trash, artifacts of a civilization that had ended on a Tuesday. "Steady," I whispered. "Don't spill it." Kevin's hands were shaking so bad the glass clinked against the bottleneck of the jerry can we were using as a staging bucket. "It smells strong, man. The bear, it's gonna smell us." "The bear smells like a beehive rolled in musk," I said, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. "The diesel will mask our scent, or confuse it. That's the hope." We filled 4 bottles. I ripped strips off the hem of my flannel shirt, my favorite shirt, to make the wicks. I stuffed them into the necks of the bottles, soaking them thoroughly. Molotov cocktails, the poor man's grenade, the engineer's crude solution to a biological problem. "Okay," I said, capping the last bottle with a rag. "Change of plan. We don't burn the bridge down. We burn the bear off the bridge." Kevin looked at me, eyes wide. "What? Why?" "Because if we burn the bridge, we're stranded on this side. The ravine is 50 feet deep, and the sides are sheer shale. We can't climb it. We have to use the structure." "So we provoke it?" "We hurt it. Animals panic when they burn, even mutated ones. We hit it with the fire. It charges or it retreats. If it charges, I shoot it. If it retreats, we run. Either way, the bridge has to be clear for about 30 seconds. I handed 2 bottles to Kevin. They felt heavy, dangerous. "You pitch for a softball team in high school, Kevin?" I played World of Warcraft." "Great. Aim for the center mass. Don't hit the railing. If you hit the railing, you burn the bridge and we die. Understand?" He nodded. He looked like he was about to vomit. We crept back toward the creek. The yellow fog was swirling in eddies now, agitated by the heat coming off the bear. We got to within 40 feet. The Guardian was still there. It had shifted position slightly. It was scratching its armored back against a bridge truss. The sound was like a chainsaw cutting through wet wood. Reap, reap. The glowing sack in its belly was pulsing faster. Thump, 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 thump. I could see shapes pushing against the translucent membrane from the inside. I crouched behind a support pylon. I looked at Kevin. I held up my lighter. Flick. The flame caught the diesel-soaked rag instantly. Kevin lit his. The sudden light in the fog was like a flare. The bear stopped scratching. It swung its massive head toward us. The moss covering its eyes seemed to retract, revealing slick black orbs underneath. It let out a huff. "Now!" I screamed. "Throw!" I stepped out and hurled my bottle. It spiraled through the mist, end over end. My aim was true. The bottle smashed against the creature's left shoulder. The diesel ignited instantly, splashing liquid fire across its fur and the mossy armor. Kevin threw his. He missed the body, but hit the wooden deck of the bridge right at the bear's feet. Whoosh! A wall of fire erupted. The bear didn't roar. It didn't growl. It shrieked. The sound brought me to my knees. It wasn't just a vocal cord vibration. It was acoustic warfare. The fire climbed the creature's fur. The moss sizzled and popped, but the bear didn't retreat. It stood up on its hind legs, towering 12 feet in the air, framed by the flames. And then the sack opened. It didn't burst. It unzipped. A vertical slit down the center of the abdomen parted. They came out in a cloud. Wasps, but not normal wasps. These were the size of sparrows. Their bodies were glowing violet. Their stingers dripped with the same neon sludge I'd seen on the trees. "Run!" Kevin screamed. He turned to bolt back toward the road. "No!" I grabbed his jacket and yanked him back. "Forward! We have to go forward!" The swarm wasn't attacking us yet. They were attacking the fire on the bear. I watched in horror as the giant insects dive-bombed the flames on the bear's fur. They were smothering the fire with their bodies. They were sacrificing themselves, bursting on contact and releasing a retardant slime. The bear dropped to all fours and charged. It was a tank made of meat and wood, rushing through the firewall. The bridge shook violently. The old timbers groaned under the sudden impact load. I raised the Winchester. "Get behind me!" I didn't aim for the head. The head was armored plate. I aimed for the open slit in the stomach, the hive. The bear was 20 feet away, 15. I saw the swarm turning toward me now, 100 violet eyes. I fired! The first round went wide, hitting the shoulder plate. Ping! The second round went right into the amber slush inside the abdomen. The effect was catastrophic.
I don't know what kind of gas those things produce inside their hives. Methane, hydrogen, something else. But when the tracer hot round hit it, the bear's midsection expanded violently. A shockwave of yellow ichor and bug parts blasted outward. The creature's momentum carried it forward, but its spine was severed. It collapsed, a ton of biomass sliding across the wooden deck of the bridge. It skidded, clawing at the wood, leaving deep gouges. It stopped 5 feet from us. The top half was still moving. It dragged itself forward 1 inch. The eyes were dead, but the jaw snapped. Clack, clack. The swarm fell into chaos. Without the queen, or whatever the host was, they lost cohesion. They buzzed wildly, slamming into trees, into the bridge railing, into the ground. But the bridge... I looked down. The diesel fire Kevin had started on the deck hadn't been put out. The wasps had focused on the bear. The bridge deck was burning. The old creosote-soaked timber was catching fast. "Go!" I shoved Kevin. "Run! Jump over it!" The carcass of the bear blocked the center of the bridge. The fire was licking at its fur again. Kevin didn't hesitate this time. He sprinted at the corpse. He vaulted onto the massive shoulder, slipped on the slime, scrambled on hands and knees over the armored back, and dropped down the other side. I followed. I stepped onto the bear. It felt hot. The heat radiating from it was intense. I could feel the remaining wasps crunching under my boots. As I climbed over the rib cage, a hand reached out. Not a bear paw, a human hand. It pushed out of the ruin of the stomach sac, a human arm fused with the bear's anatomy, covered in amber slime. It grabbed my ankle. Help. Me. I looked down. Embedded in the meat of the bear, like a pilot in a cockpit, was a face. It was half digested, fused to the spine. I kicked, hard. My boot connected with the wrist. The bones crunched, soft like wet chalk. The grip broke. I rolled off the carcass and hit the wooden deck on the far side. "Move, Elias, move!" Kevin was screaming from the far bank. I scrambled up. The fire had eaten through the railing on the left. The support beam underneath gave a loud crack. I sprinted the last 10 yards. The bridge groaned. The section behind me, where the bear's heavy corpse lay, gave way. I dove forward, landing in the dirt of the road on the far side. I rolled onto my back and looked. The center span was gone. The bear, the fire, and the swarm had fallen into the ravine. I could see the glow of the fire down in the creek bed, hissing as the water fought the flames. We were on the other side. Kevin was sitting on the ground, hyperventilating. He was covered in soot and yellow slime. We actually killed it," he gasped. "We actually killed it." "We survived it," I corrected, standing up and brushing the ash off my rifle. "There's a difference." I looked at the road ahead. The fog was thinner here. The elevation was starting to climb. We were at the base of Blackwood Peak's approach. "Check your body," I said. "Any cuts? Any scratches?" Kevin checked his arms. "I think I'm good. You?" I looked at my ankle where the hand had grabbed me. The denim was stained with amber goo, but it hadn't soaked through to the skin. "I'm clear." "So what now? We climb the mountain?" "Now," I said, pointing up the trail, "we walk. It's 4 miles of switchbacks to the tree line. And Kevin? Yeah? Don't drink the water." We began the ascent. The climb was brutal, 15% grade, loose shale. But as we climbed, the forest changed. The giant mutated trees gave way to smaller, scrubby pines. The red moss patches grew smaller, less vibrant. The air grew colder. My engineer's mind was constantly calculating. Elevation, 4,800 feet, 5,200 feet. The radio broadcast said safety was above 8,000 feet, but the Verdance seemed to be struggling even here. The yellow fog didn't rise this high. It pooled in the valleys below us like a toxic sea. By late afternoon, around 4 p.m., we reached a plateau, 6,000 feet. "Hold up," I said. "Let's take 5. We sat on a granite ledge overlooking the world. It was a terrifying view. To the west, the sun was setting, but the landscape, it wasn't Earth anymore. The entire valley floor, miles and miles of it, was purple. The Verdance had consumed everything. I could see massive spore clouds drifting like hurricanes over the distant towns. "My mom lives in Spokane," Kevin said quietly. He was staring at a dark plume on the horizon. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Spokane was gone. "We need shelter," I said, changing the subject. "We can't sleep in the open. If the wind changes, it could blow the spores up here." "There's an old mine up ahead. My grandpa used to talk about it, the Silver Bell. He said the entrance was near the split rock."
A mine? I frowned. Underground? It's rock, Kevin argued. Solid rock. Plants don't grow in rock, right? He had a point, and a mine meant one entrance to defend. Okay, show me. We hiked another mile. The sun was gone now, replaced by the rising moon. The air was crisp, cold. It felt clean for the first time in 2 days. We found the entrance. It was a dark maw in the side of the cliff, framed by rotting timbers. I shined my headlamp inside. Dry, dusty, no moss, no yellow film. "Looks clear," I said, "but mines have their own dangers. Bad air, cave-ins." "Better than the bear," Kevin muttered. We stepped inside. The temperature dropped 10 degrees instantly. It smelled of old earth and rust. We walked back about 50 feet, finding a widened chamber where the miners must have stored equipment. It was defensible. "We camp here," I said. "We don't go deeper." I set down my pack. My shoulders screamed in relief. I pulled out a bottle of water, one of the precious clean ones. "Ration check," I said. "I have 3 liters of water, 2 protein bars, a bag of jerky." Kevin checked his pockets. "I have half a pack of gum and a lighter." "We'll split the jerky tonight. Tomorrow we hunt for a spring. High-altitude springs should be safe." We sat in the dark, the headlamp turned low to save batteries. "Elias? Yeah? Do you think we're the only ones?" I looked at the shadow of this kid against the rock wall. "No, the broadcast mentioned Fairchild. There are others. Humans are like cockroaches, Kevin. We're hard to kill." "That bear, it had a guy inside it." "I saw. Do you think he was awake the whole time?" I paused. I thought about the eyes, the way the hand had grabbed me. "I think," I said slowly, "that we shouldn't think about that. Sleep. I'll take first watch." Kevin curled up on the hard stone floor, using his hard hat as a pillow. He was asleep in minutes. I sat with the rifle across my lap, staring at the tunnel entrance. The silence up here was different. It wasn't the heavy, expectant silence of the tower. It was a cold, indifferent silence, the silence of stone. But deep in the mine, deeper than we had gone, I heard something. Drip, drip, drip. Water. And then a scrape. Not the scratching of vines. This was the sound of metal dragging on stone. I stiffened. I turned my head, angling my good ear down the tunnel into the darkness. Clink. Someone or something was deeper in the mine. I didn't wake Kevin. I stood up silently. I raised the rifle. The Verdance was outside, but we weren't alone inside.
Darkness underground is different from darkness in a forest. In the forest, there's always starlight, or the glow of the moon, or now the bioluminescence of the infection. Down here, the darkness is a physical weight. It presses against your eyeballs. It feels like being buried alive. I left Kevin sleeping near the entrance. The kid was exhausted, his body shutting down after the adrenaline dump of the bridge. I moved deeper into the drift, placing my feet carefully. Heel, toe, roll the weight. Don't kick a stone. Sound travels in a mine shaft like a bullet in a barrel. I kept my headlamp off. I didn't want to be a target. I navigated by touch, running my left hand along the rough, cold stone of the wall. Clink. There it was again, ahead of me, maybe 50 yards. It sounded like a pickaxe striking rock, or maybe a spoon hitting a tin plate. I stopped. I smelled the air. The front of the mine smelled like dust and old earth. Here, deeper in, there was a new scent. Wood smoke? No. Sulfur. Sharp, rotten egg sulfur. And something else. Cooking meat. I crept forward. The tunnel curved to the right. A faint orange glow spilled around the bend, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I hugged the wall, rifle raised. I peeked around the corner. The tunnel opened up into a larger cavern, shored up with ancient, blackened timber beams. In the center, a small fire was burning inside a 50-gallon steel drum. The smoke was being funneled up into a fissure in the ceiling by a piece of rusted ductwork. Sitting next to the fire, on a crate of dynamite, was a man. He was old, ancient. His skin was the color of anthracite coal, stained by decades of dust. He had a beard that looked like steel wool. He was wearing a miner's helmet with a carbide lamp that wasn't lit. He was sharpening a machete with a whetstone. Scrape, scrape, scrape. That was the sound I'd heard. He didn't look infected. He just looked crazy. I stepped into the light,
rifle aimed at his chest. "Don't move," I said. My voice echoed. The old man didn't jump. He didn't even look up. He just kept sharpening the blade. "You're loud," he rasped. His voice sounded like gravel in a mixer. "Boots are too heavy. You walked like a surface dweller. Stomp, stomp, stomp." "Drop the knife," I ordered. He stopped scraping. He looked up. His eyes were milky, cataract clouded, but they locked onto me with unsettling precision. "It ain't a knife, son. It's a brush tool, and if I drop it, I can't kill the roots when they poke through." "Who are you?" "I'm the landlord," he cackled, a dry, wheezing laugh. "Name's Silas, and you're trespassing in the Silver Bell. You bring the green with you?" "No, we're clean." "We?" Silas tilted his head. "You got a pup with you?" "A kid. He's sleeping at the entrance." Silas spat into the fire. It hissed. "Bring him in. Entrance ain't safe. The draft pulls inward at night, pulls the spores right down the throat of the mountain. You leave him there, he'll wake up with a garden growing in his lungs." I hesitated. Trusting a subterranean hermit wasn't high on my list of survival strategies, but his logic about the draft, as an engineer, it tracked. Cooling air sinks. The mind breathes in at night. "If you try anything," I said, "I'll bury you here." Silas grinned, revealing 3 yellow teeth. "Son, I'm already buried. Go get your pup." Kevin was groggy, stumbling. When he saw Silas, he recoiled. Is he infected?" whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm cured," Silas shouted, banging his machete on the drum. "Pickled in sulfur and darkness. That's the secret. The green hates the sulfur." We sat by the fire. It was warm, the first real warmth we'd felt in 48 hours. Silas offered us a tin cup of something. It smelled like moonshine and dead rats. I declined. Kevin took a sip and coughed for a minute straight. "So," Silas said, looking at my rifle, "you climbing?" "We're heading for the peak. The radio said the infection slows at altitude, above 8,000 feet. Silas nodded slowly. "Radio's half right. Cold slows it. Thin air slows it, but it don't stop it. Not completely. The green is hungry. It eats rock if it has to. I seen it." "You've seen the roots eat rock?" "Limestone, mostly. Acid." Silas tapped his temple. "They excrete acid, melts the stone, makes soil. Then they grow." I looked at the timber beams above us. They were old, stressing under the weight of the mountain. "How deep does this mine go?" "Deep enough to touch hell if you dig long enough, but I collapsed the lower drifts, used dynamite, sealed them off." "Why?" Silas leaned forward. The firelight cast deep shadows in the wrinkles of his face. "Because the roots aren't just coming from the surface, boy. They're following the water table, up from the bottom. The aquifer is tainted. The green is drinking the mountain from the inside out." A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. "So we're trapped," I said. "If we go out, the spores get us. If we stay here, the roots come from below."
"Not trapped," Silas said. "Just squeezed, like a pimple." We all froze. "What was that?" Kevin whispered. Silas stood up. He wasn't smiling anymore. He grabbed a stethoscope, an old medical one, hanging from a nail on a beam. He pressed it against the rock wall. He listened. His eyes widened. "They found a seam," he whispered. "Who?" "The roots. The big ones. Tap roots. They're hunting heat. They feel the fire." He spun around and kicked the steel drum over. "Put it out! Put it out now!" Sparks flew everywhere. The burning wood scattered across the stone floor. Silas started stomping on the embers frantically. "Kevin, help him!" I shouted. I grabbed my water bottle, my precious clean water, and splashed it on the biggest log. It hissed and died. The cave plunged into darkness, lit only by the dying red glow of the coals and my headlamp. "Flashlights off," Silas hissed. "Heat! They sense heat!" I clicked my headlamp off. Total blackness. We stood there in the dark. I could hear Kevin's terrified breathing. Then, I heard the wall tear open. It wasn't a crash, it was a grinding crumble. To my left, the solid rock wall just disintegrated. I turned my head. In the pitch black, I saw it. Bioluminescence. A point of pale violet light pushed through the rock face, then another. Then a thick, pulsating, glowing mass burst through the stone like a fist through drywall. It was a taproot. A taproot. It was thick as a man's waist, covered in slime, glowing with that sick internal light. It swept the room blindly like an elephant's trunk. Swish, swish. It knocked over the steel drum. Clang! The root recoiled at the sound, then lunged toward it. It wrapped around the hot metal drum. Hiss! The heat burned it. The root shuddered and retracted, thrashing wildly in pain. "Run!" Silas screamed. "Back to the drift! Move!" I grabbed Kevin's arm in the dark and pulled. I clicked my light on for a split second, just enough to see the path, then off again. We scrambled back toward the entrance tunnel. Behind us, the cavern was collapsing. The taproot wasn't alone. Smaller feeder roots were bursting through the ceiling, raining rocks down on Silas's camp. "Come on, old man!" I yelled back. Silas was right behind us, moving surprisingly fast for his age. He had his machete in one hand and a bundle of something in the other. We hit the narrow tunnel. The vibration was shaking the floor plates. Dust choked the air. "The entrance!" Kevin shouted. "We have to get out!" "No!" Silas barked. "Not the entrance. The vent shaft. The entrance is too far. They'll bring the ceiling down on us before we make it." "What vent shaft?" I demanded. "Vertical rise, 30 yards up, goes to the upper slope. Ladder's rusty, but it holds." I had to make a choice. Trust the crazy mole man or run for the daylight we knew. The tunnel behind us groaned. A massive crash echoed as the main cavern sealed itself off. The air pressure spiked, popping my ears. "Lead the way, Silas." He took a sharp left into a side drift I hadn't noticed before. It was narrow, barely shoulder width. We ran. The ground here was wet. Slime was dripping from the ceiling cracks. The infection was ahead of us, too. "There!" Silas pointed. Ahead, a rusted iron ladder bolted to the rock wall disappeared up into a vertical shaft. "Up! Up! Up!" Silas shoved Kevin toward the ladder. Kevin scrambled up. The rungs groaned but held. I waited for Silas. "Go!" "Ladies first," he cackled, but he was eyeing the tunnel behind us. I climbed. The metal was cold and slick with condensation. I looked down. Silas was climbing below me. And below him, the tunnel was filling with light, violet light. The roots were flooding the corridor like water, a tsunami of vegetation squeezing through the rock. "Climb faster!" I yelled up at Kevin. We scrambled up the shaft, 10 feet, 20, 30. Above me, Kevin hit a grate. "It's locked!" he screamed. "There's a padlock!" My heart stopped. Of course there was. "Move aside!" I yelled. "I can't! There's no room!" I looked down. The roots were at the bottom of the ladder. They were starting to climb the rails, fast, spiraling up like snakes. "Silas!" I shouted. "The key!" "Don't got a key!" Silas shouted below me. "Use the boomstick!" The rifle.
Kevin, cover your eyes! Look away! I braced my legs against the sides of the shaft, holding on with one hand. I unslung the Winchester with the other. It was awkward, heavy. I pointed the barrel straight up, past Kevin's leg, at the padlock hasp. "Don't move your leg!" Sparks showered down. The lock shattered. Kevin slammed his shoulder into the grate. It flew open. He pulled himself out. "Come on!" I climbed up, muscles burning. I dragged myself onto the rocky ground. We were outside. It was night. The moon was high. We were on a steep scree slope, higher up the mountain. The air was freezing. I reached down to help Silas. His hand reached up from the darkness of the shaft, but just as our fingers brushed, something else caught him. A vine, thin, white, fast. It wrapped around his ankle. Yank! "Not today!" Silas roared. He didn't scream for help. He didn't reach for me again. He pulled the pin on the bundle he was holding. Dynamite. "Run!" he shouted from the hole. I grabbed Kevin and threw us both behind a large boulder. The shaft collapsed. The sound of sliding rock filled the night. Then, silence. Just the wind whistling over the jagged rocks. We lay there in the dirt, panting. Silas was gone. The mine was gone. Kevin was crying softly. He closed the door, I said, staring at the smoking hole in the ground. He bought us time. I stood up. I was trembling, exhaustion, shock, dehydration. I looked at the peak. It was closer now, looming above us, stark white in the moonlight. Blackwood Peak. But between us and the summit, on the high ridge, I saw lights. Not spore lights, electric lights, floodlights. There was a structure up there, a building. "Kevin," I said, pointing. "Look!" Kevin wiped his eyes and looked up. Is that the station?" "That's the weather observatory," I said. "It's supposed to be automated, unmanned." "Then who turned on the lights?" I zoomed in with my binoculars. Silhouettes, people, walking the perimeter of the observatory, and fences, tall fences. "People," I whispered, "real people." But then I saw the flag. Even at this distance in the moonlight, I could see it flapping. It wasn't the American flag. It wasn't the Forest Service flag. It was yellow, a bright yellow banner with a black symbol in the center. A flower. "They aren't rescuers," I said, a cold dread settling in my stomach, heavier than the mine darkness. "Who are they?" "I don't know," I said, checking the action on the Winchester. 3 rounds left. Hypothermia is a deceptive killer. It doesn't feel like freezing. Eventually, it feels like burning. Your skin gets hot. Your mind gets fuzzy. You start making bad decisions because your brain is hoarding blood for the core organs, starving the logic centers. We had escaped the mine and the crushing roots, but we had traded the fire for the ice. We were at 7,800 feet. The temperature was well below freezing. The wind chill was brutal. Kevin was in bad shape. "Keep moving," I shouted over the wind. "Don't stop, Kevin. Friction is heat." I'm so tired, Elias," Kevin slurred. He stumbled on a patch of scree, his knees hitting the sharp granite. He didn't even flinch. That was a bad sign. Numbness. I hauled him up. "Look at the lights. Look at the observatory. Warmth. 4 walls. Just get there." We were approaching the summit ridge. The Blackwood Observatory sat on the peak like a white blister. A geodesic dome, a rectangular support building, and a perimeter fence topped with razor wire. And those lights, halogen floods bathing the rocky perimeter in harsh, artificial white. But as we got closer, crawling now, belly down on the freezing rock to stay out of the wind, I saw what they were doing. There were 3 of them, figures in bright yellow hazmat suits, not the flimsy disposable kind, heavy, rubberized, industrial gear. They were standing near the main gate. They weren't guarding the gate against the Verdance. They were welcoming it. I pulled out my binoculars. My hands were shaking so bad it was hard to focus. Through the lenses, I saw a truck, a dark SUV, parked inside the fence. The back was open. The figures in yellow were unloading something wrapped in a tarp. It was long, human-sized. They dragged the bundle to the edge of the cliff where the rock face dropped away into the spore-choked clouds below. They didn't throw it over. They secured it to a rope and lowered it down, into the fog, into the green. "What are they doing?" Kevin whispered. His teeth were chattering so hard it sounded like a drum roll.
I'm fishing, I said, a grim realization settling in, or feeding. I watched as they hauled the rope back up a minute later. The tarp was gone. The rope came up empty, coated in slime. One of the hazmat figures wiped the slime off the rope and put it into a jar. They were harvesting the infection. "We can't go to the gate," I said. "They aren't rescue." "I don't care," Kevin moaned. "I need heat. Please, Elias." He was right. We had minutes, not hours. "Okay, engineering solution," I muttered. "Every perimeter has a blind spot." We circled to the north side of the compound. Here, the observatory building was built flush against a steep rock face to shield it from the prevailing winds. The fence line ended at the cliff edge, relying on the sheer drop to keep intruders out. But the fence had a gap. Where the chain link met the rock, there was a drainage culvert, a concrete pipe, maybe 20 inches wide, poking out under the fence to divert snowmelt. It was tight, claustrophobic, but it led inside the wire. "In the pipe," I ordered. Kevin looked at the dark hole. "I can't." "You can. It's out of the wind. Crawl." I shoved him in. He wiggled forward. I followed, dragging my pack and the rifle. The concrete sucked the heat right out of my stomach. It smelled of rust and ice. We popped out on the other side, inside the compound. We were behind a large generator shed. The roar of the diesel engine was loud here, vibrating the ground. But the exhaust. A vent on the side of the shed was pumping out hot, oily air. Kevin practically threw himself at it. He pressed his face against the grate, gasping as the heat hit him. "Don't pass out," I hissed, scanning the yard. The compound was clean. No moss, no vines. The cold up here, combined with the sterile rock, kept the Verdance at bay. It was an island of gray in a world of green. But in the center of the yard, they had built something. A greenhouse, a high-tech polycarbonate geodesic dome, separate from the main observatory. It was glowing from the inside with grow lights, pink and purple spectrums. And inside, I could see the silhouettes of tall, twisting shapes. They were growing it. They were cultivating the infection here, above the safety line. We need to get indoors, real indoors. This generator shed, the door. I tried the handle, locked. I looked at the hinges, external, a design flaw. I pulled the pin on the top hinge using the spike of my climbing axe, then the bottom. I leveraged the door open from the hinge side. We slipped inside. The noise was deafening, the massive caterpillar generator thumping away. But the heat was glorious. It was 80 degrees in there.
Kevin collapsed in the corner, curling into a ball. "Oh, God, it's warm." I didn't relax. I wedged the door back into place. I checked the rifle. 3 rounds. I looked around the shed. Tool racks, fuel drums, and a corkboard on the wall. I walked over to it. Photos. Satellite photos. They showed the spread of the bloom. Thermal imaging showing heat signatures of the spore clouds. But there was a map in the center. A map of the Pacific Northwest. Red circles were drawn around major cities. Seattle, Portland, Spokane. But they were blue stars drawn in remote locations, high-altitude locations. Blackwood Peak, Mount Rainier, Mount Hood. And connecting them, lines. Flight paths? Spore drifts? "Elias," Kevin whispered. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the far wall. I turned. There was a window into the main building, a heavy, reinforced observation window. And standing on the other side, watching us, was a face. It wasn't wearing a hazmat suit. It was a woman, late 40s, severe haircut, lab coat. She didn't look surprised. She looked disappointed. She raised a hand and pressed a button on the console in front of her. I spun around. Vents in the ceiling of the generator shed opened. White gas poured in. "Halon!" I shouted. "Fire suppression system! It sucks the oxygen out!" It wasn't poison. It was worse. It was displacement. Halon gas replaces oxygen to starve a fire. It starves lungs just as fast. "Kevin, door!" I threw myself at the door we had unhinged, but the magnetic locks were holding it tight against the frame now. I battered it with the rifle butt. Thud, thud. Useless. The air grew thin instantly. My head swam. Kevin was already unconscious, slumped against the fuel drum. I looked at the woman in the window. She was taking notes on a clipboard. I raised the Winchester. I aimed at the glass. Boom! The glass didn't break. It was ballistic. A spiderweb crack appeared, but it held. My vision tunneled. Gray spots danced in my eyes. My lungs heaved, trying to pull oxygen that wasn't there. I sank to my knees. The rifle clattered to the floor. The last thing I saw was the woman turning away and two figures in yellow suits entering the room behind her. Then, black. Waking up was slow. No gasping, just a gradual return of sensation. I was strapped down. I knew the feeling of restraints, but this was different. I was upright, strapped to a chair? No. An examination table tilted vertically. My eyes focused. Harsh fluorescent lights. I was in a lab. Clean white walls, stainless steel counters. To my left, Kevin. He was strapped to a similar table. He was unconscious, hooked up to an IV drip. The fluid in the bag wasn't clear. It was a pale, translucent yellow. "Kevin!" I croaked. My throat felt like sandpaper. "He's stable. His core temperature is back to normal." I looked forward. The woman from the window was standing there. She held a tablet. She looked like a doctor, but her eyes, there was a fanaticism there, buried under layers of academic detachment. "Who are you?" I demanded. I tested the straps. Leather. Strong. "You are Dr. Aris. This is the Blackwood Field Station for the Mycogenesis Project." "Mycogenesis? You made this? You made the Verdance?" "Made? No. We didn't make it. We woke it up. It's been here a long time, Elias, dormant in the deep crust. We just gave it a nudge." "You killed everyone! The valley, the cities, my friend in the mine!" "Correction," she said, tapping her tablet. "We initiated a phase change. The human species has reached a biological dead end. We consume, we destroy, we do not integrate." She walked over to a microscope on the counter. "The Verdance is the ultimate integrator. It connects every living thing into a single unified consciousness. No more war, no more hunger, just the network." "It's a fungus," I spat. "It turns people into fertilizer." "That is the crude stage, the initial colonization. What you saw down there, the aggression, the mutation, that is the immune response of a confused system. But here," she gestured to the glass wall behind her. I looked. It looked into the greenhouse I had seen earlier. Inside, it was a jungle, but it wasn't chaotic. It was harmonious. The plants were glowing with a soft, steady light, and walking among them were people. They weren't wearing hazmat suits. They were naked, but they weren't human anymore. Not fully. Green veins pulsed under their skin. Flowers, delicate, orchid-like blooms, grew from their shoulders and collarbones. Their eyes were solid violet, but they weren't empty like the deer's. They were aware. They were calm. One of them looked at me through the glass and smiled. It was a look of pure, drugged bliss. "Symbiosis," Dr. Aris whispered reverently. "The next step. We filter the spores. We refine the strain. We don't get eaten, Elias. We become." She turned back to me. "Kevin is already receiving the priming dose. He's young, malleable. He will adapt beautifully." I struggled against the straps, adrenaline flooding my system. "Get it out of him! Don't you touch him!" "And you," she looked at my chart, "structural engineer, high problem-solving aptitude, high stress tolerance. You survived the ascent. You killed a hive bear. Remarkable genetics." She picked up a syringe. It was filled with the glowing violet liquid. "We need guardians, Elias. The network needs antibodies, strong ones." She stepped closer. The needle caught the light. Don't worry, the fear goes away first. That's the gift. If you do this, I will tear this place down. I will calculate the load-bearing stress of your skull, and I will collapse it." She laughed, a dry, scientific laugh. "I'm counting on it. Aggression is useful." She swabbed my arm. The alcohol wipe was cold. I looked at Kevin. The yellow fluid was halfway down the tube. Drip, drip. I looked at the syringe. I looked at the restraints, leather straps with metal buckles. Engineering analysis. Leather stretches when wet. It becomes pliable. I looked at the IV stand next to me. "Wait," I said. My voice trembled. "Wait, if I'm going to be one of you, I want to know one thing." Dr. Aris paused, the needle inches from my skin. Vanity. Scientists always want to explain their work. "What?" "The frequency, the radio broadcast. Why lure people here if you just experiment on them?" "Biomass," she shrugged. "We need raw material to refine the strain. Most don't make the climb. Those who do serve a higher purpose." "Okay," I said. "Okay." I didn't have a plan. I had a split second of opportunity. I wasn't trying to escape the strap. I was trying to break the table. The table was bolted to the floor, but the pivot mechanism, the thing that allowed it to tilt, was a simple locking pin. I had heard it click when they tilted me up. I threw my weight backward, slamming my spine against the table, while simultaneously kicking my legs forward with every ounce of hysterical strength I had. The locking pin sheared. The table swung backward like a seesaw, going from vertical to horizontal instantly. Dr. Aris was leaning in. The sudden motion caught her off guard. The table edge slammed into her midsection. Oof! She stumbled back, dropping the syringe. It shattered on the floor. Crash! I was horizontal now, staring at the ceiling lights, but my right hand was near the tray of instruments. I couldn't reach the buckles, but I could reach a scalpel. I stretched my fingers, strained. The leather dug into my wrists. My fingertip brushed the cold steel handle. Dr. Aris was recovering. She was reaching for an alarm button on the wall. "Security!" she screamed. I grabbed the scalpel. I didn't cut the strap, too thick. I slashed my own wrist, superficially, just enough to make blood, to make it slippery. Then I yanked. The blood acted like lubricant. The leather slid. My thumb joint popped. I dislocated it on purpose. My hand slipped free. Dr. Aris hit the alarm. I unbuckled the other straps. I fell off the table. I stood up. My thumb was dangling, useless. My wrist was bleeding. I held the scalpel in my left hand. Dr. Aris grabbed a taser from the counter. She fired. Zap! The probes hit my chest. Pain. White-hot lightning. My muscles locked. I fell to the floor, convulsing. But I wasn't out. The door burst open. 2 guards in tactical gear rushed in. Dr. Aris stood over me, panting. "Strap him back down and get another syringe, a double dose." I looked at Kevin. The yellow fluid was halfway down the tube. I had failed.
There is a specific kind of clarity that comes when you realize you are already dead. The fear evaporates because there's nothing left to lose. Dr. Aris had said fear goes away with the infection. She was wrong. Fear goes away when you decide to take everyone else with you. I was on the floor, muscles twitching from the voltage. The 2 guards were on me instantly. One grabbed my legs, the other went for my arms. "Hold him still!" Dr. Aris shouted. She was fumbling in a drawer for another syringe. My right hand was slippery with blood from where I'd slashed my wrist. My thumb was dislocated, throbbing with a dull, sickening heat. But my left hand was free for a split second before the guard clamped down. I didn't reach for the guard. I reached for the taser wires still trailing from my chest. Dr. Aris was still holding the taser grip, distracted, looking for the needle.
I wrapped the wire around my left fist and yanked hard. "Get over here!" I roared. It wasn't elegant, it was physics. 180 pounds of desperate engineer jerking a 130-pound scientist off balance. She flew forward. She slammed into the guard holding my arms. Crash! The guard stumbled. His grip loosened. I rolled. I brought my knee up into the guard's groin. He doubled over, gasping. I scrambled up. I was dizzy, bleeding, and half paralyzed, but I was moving. The second guard, the one on my legs, drew his sidearm, a Glock. "Stop or I shoot!" I didn't stop. I dove. Not at him, at the counter. I grabbed a heavy metal tray of surgical instruments and hurled it at him. Scalpels, clamps, and scissors showered the air like shrapnel. He flinched, raising his arms to protect his face. That was the window. I grabbed the nearest heavy object, a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. I swung it. Clang! The red steel cylinder connected with the guard's helmet. He went down like a sack of cement. The gun skittered across the floor. Dr. Elias was scrambling backward, shouting orders into a radio. "Containment breach in Lab 1! Send the cleanup crew!" I looked at the gun. It was 10 feet away. I looked at the glass wall of the greenhouse. The symbiotes, the plant people, were pressed against the glass, watching the violence with those calm, violet eyes. "You want integration?" I yelled at Elias. "You want to be one with nature?" I grabbed the fire extinguisher again. I pulled the pin. I didn't spray her. I threw the heavy cylinder through the observation window of the greenhouse. The barrier was gone. The atmosphere inside the greenhouse, hot, humid, spore-choked, rushed into the sterile lab. A fog of pink and gold pollen blasted out, and the guardians stepped through. They moved with a terrifying grace. The first one, a tall male with ferns growing from his collarbone, stepped over the broken glass. His bare feet didn't bleed. Dr. Elias stood up, trembling. She held out her hands. "Subject 7, she commanded, her voice wavering. "Return to containment. Halt!" Subject 7 looked at her. He tilted his head. A vine uncoiled from his neck, moving like a cobra. "We are hungry," the thing spoke. Its voice was a rustle of dry leaves. It lunged. Dr. Elias screamed. The symbiote didn't bite her. It embraced her. The vines on its body lashed out, wrapping around her lab coat, her arms, her neck. It pulled her into its biomass. I saw thorns punch through the fabric. I saw her skin turning gray instantly as the rapid colonization began. The other symbiotes poured into the room. They ignored me. They went for the guards. They went for the source of the noise. Chaos is a ladder, right? Or maybe chaos is just a distraction. I ran to Kevin. He was thrashing on the table. The yellow fluid in the IV bag was empty. It was all in him. "Kevin! Kevin, look at me!" I ripped the strap off his chest. I yanked the needle out of his arm. Blood and yellow ichor spurted out. His eyes fluttered open. They weren't brown anymore. The irises were flecked with gold. The pupils were dilated to the size of dinner plates. "Elias, I can hear them singing." "Don't listen to the music!" I slapped his face, hard. "Listen to me! We are leaving!" I hauled him off the table. He was heavy, dead weight. His skin felt fever hot, burning through his shirt. "Can you walk?" "The floor is breathing," Kevin mumbled. "Walk on it anyway." I dragged him towards the door. Behind us, the lab was a slaughterhouse of vegetation. Dr. Elias was on her knees, screaming as orchids bloomed rapidly from her tear ducts. The guards were being pulled apart by creatures that looked like Greek statues made of kudzu. We hit the corridor. Alarm lights strobed red. Whoop, whoop. "The SUV," I panted. "The garage. Where is the garage?" I didn't know the layout, but I knew architecture. Garages are usually on the periphery, near the access road, ground level. We ran down the stark white hallway. I had to support Kevin with my good arm. My right hand, the one with the slashed wrist and the hanging thumb, was tucked into my shirt to stop the bleeding. "Halt!" A security team,
3 men in tactical gear turned the corner ahead of us. They raised assault rifles. We were dead. There was no cover. Then the ventilation grate above their heads buckled. Creak! Crash! Roots, massive, thick roots burst through the ceiling tiles. The Verdance hadn't just breached the lab, it had smelled the breach. The wild infection outside, the cold, aggressive strain, was reacting to the release of the spores inside. The roots slammed into the security team like wrecking balls. Go! 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 I dragged Kevin into a side door marked Stairwell North. We tumbled down the concrete steps, 1 flight, 2 flights. We burst out into a loading bay. Freezing air hit my face. The bay door was open. And there it was, the black SUV I had seen through the binoculars, a modified Ford Expedition with a brush guard and off-road tires. It was idling. A driver in a yellow hazmat suit was standing by the tailgate, looking confused at the alarms blaring from the building. I let go of Kevin. Stay here! I ran. I didn't have a weapon. I left the guard's gun in the lab. I had nothing but adrenaline and rage. The driver saw me. He reached for a holster. I didn't slow down. I tackled him. We hit the icy concrete. His helmet cracked against the ground. I punched the faceplate. My injured hand screamed in protest, but the plastic cracked. Get out! I screamed. Get out! I ripped the helmet off. It was a kid, maybe 25. He looked terrified. Don't kill me. I'm just transport. Give me the keys. It's running! It's running! I shoved him away. He scrambled backwards, slipping on the ice, and ran into the darkness. I ran back to the door. Kevin was slumped against the frame, staring at his hands. My veins are turning green, Elias. Get in the car. I shoved him into the passenger seat. I jumped into the driver's side. The interior smelled like new leather and coffee. It was absurdly normal. I slammed the door. I locked it. I put it in drive. We peeled out of the loading bay, tires spinning on the frost before catching traction. We hit the perimeter gate. It was closed, chain link topped with razor wire. Hold on! I floored it. The heavy brush guard on the front of the Expedition was made for this. Crash! The gate folded. Metal screeched against the hood. The windshield spiderwebbed but held. We were through. We were plummeting down the access road. Switchbacks, ice, gravel. I fought the steering wheel with one good hand. The descent was terrifying. To my left, the drop-off into the spore clouds. To my right, the cliff face. Behind us, the observatory was burning. I looked in the rearview mirror. Flames were shooting out of the greenhouse dome, a signal fire on top of the world. We did it, I breathed. Kevin, we're out. Kevin didn't answer. I looked over at him. He was staring out the window at the passing darkness. His skin was pale, sweating profusely. Kevin? He turned to me. It's quiet now, Elias. What is? The fear. She was right, Elias. The fear is gone. He smiled, and just below his jawline, I saw it. A tiny, delicate sprout of green fern pushed through the skin of his neck. It unfurled slowly, testing the air of the car. My blood ran cold. I had saved him from the lab. I had saved him from the knife, but I hadn't saved him from the infection. I gripped the steering wheel. My own wrist was throbbing. A human pain. A sharp, burning, beautiful human pain. Where are we going? Kevin asked. His voice was dreamy. I looked at the road ahead. It disappeared into the yellow fog of the valley. Fairchild, I lied. We're going to the airbase. They have doctors. Real doctors. They can fix this. Kevin nodded. He touched the fern on his neck gently. Okay, Fairchild. I drove into the fog. The SUV descended into the soup. The headlights turned everything yellow. The shapes of the twisted trees loomed on either side like sentinels. I was driving an infected boy in a stolen truck with a broken hand into the heart of the apocalypse. But I was alive, and for now, that had to be enough. Rain. Real rain. Or maybe it was condensation from the canopy. Elias? Yeah, bud? If I start to go away, you know, if I'm not
Kevin anymore? He looked at me. His eyes were almost entirely gold now. Will you stop me? I swallowed the lump in my throat. I remembered the buck. I remembered Jim. I remembered Silas closing the mine entrance. I reached into my pocket. The scalpel was still there. I took it out and jammed it into the center console, handle up. I won't let you become one of them, I promised. I won't let you be a garden. Kevin smiled again, a sad, human smile. Thanks, Elias. He leaned his head against the cold glass and closed his eyes. I kept driving. Down, down into the deep green. The descent was a slow-motion funeral procession. We were in a $60,000 fortress of steel and leather, heated seats, climate control set to 70 degrees. But outside the glass, the world had reverted to the Carboniferous period. I drove with my left hand. My right arm was tucked against my chest, throbbing in time with the engine RPMs. The adrenaline from the lab was fading, leaving behind a cold, gray exhaustion. We dropped below the snow line at 5,000 feet. The white frost on the windshield melted, replaced by the yellow smear of the fog. "Kevin," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Talk to me. Stay awake." Kevin was staring at the dashboard. His head was lolling slightly to the side, toward the fern growing from his neck. "I'm awake," he murmured. His voice sounded multiplied, like two people speaking in perfect unison, one slightly deeper than the other. "I'm just listening to the roots." "The roots don't talk, Kevin. That's the fever." "They don't use words," he corrected gently. "They use pressure. They use water. It's hydraulic language, Elias. It's beautiful." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. The leather creaked. "Drink some water," I said, pointing to a bottle in the cup holder. "Flush your system." Kevin picked up the bottle, but he didn't drink it. He uncapped it and poured it over his neck, over the fern. The plant seemed to shiver, absorbing the liquid instantly. The leaves turned a darker, richer green. "That feels better," he sighed. I looked away. I focused on the road. Forest Service Road 410 was gone. The gravel was buried under a foot of red moss. I was navigating by the gap in the trees, following the tunnel of the canopy. The SUV's headlights, bright blue-white LEDs, cut through the gloom, illuminating things that shouldn't exist. I saw flowers the size of trash can lids that snapped shut when the light hit them. I saw swarms of moths, glowing blue, smashing into the grill. I saw trees that had merged, two trunks twisting together, fusing bark and wood into a single massive organism. Symbiosis, Dr. Aris had called it. I hated that word. We hit a bump, something large and soft under the wheels. The suspension rocked. "Sorry," I muttered. "It's okay. It doesn't hurt them. They just reconnect." "Kevin, listen to me. We're going to the airfield. It's about 80 miles. We have half a tank of gas. If we make good time, we'll be there by dawn." "Dawn," Kevin repeated. He turned to me. In the glow of the dashboard lights, I saw his face. The gold flecks in his eyes had spread. The whites were gone. His irises were solid, luminous pools of amber. And on his cheek, fuzzy patches of white mold were blooming like frost. "Elias," he said, "why are you fighting it? You're in so much pain." "Pain tells me I'm alive." "Pain is just a signal. You can turn it off. The network, it shares the load. If you hurt, the forest hurts for you. It dilutes the suffering until it's just background noise." He reached out a hand. His fingers were fusing. The skin between them was webbing with green tissue. "Don't touch me," I snapped, shrinking against the door. He pulled his hand back, looking hurt, not angry, just disappointed, like Dr. Aris. "I'm just trying to help. You're lonely, Elias. You were lonely in the tower. You were lonely in the city. You don't have to be lonely." Stop it. That's the fungus talking. It's me, he insisted, tapping his chest. The sound was dull, like thumping a watermelon. I'm still here. I'm just more. I remember my mom. I remember the bulldozer. I remember you saving me on the bridge. But now I also remember. He paused, his eyes widening. I remember the rain falling 100 years ago. I remember the roots drinking the snowmelt in 1950. I remember the wolves walking over this soil before I was born. He was accessing a biological hard drive, the mycelial network, the memories of the soil. It was terrifying. It was seductive. Kevin, I said, my voice cracking, please, fight it, just for a little longer. He looked at me with infinite pity. I am fighting, Elias. I'm fighting to keep you safe. They know you're here. They know you burned the bear. They're angry. Who is angry? The older ones, the roots deep down. The steering wheel jerked out of my hand. Damn it! I stomped on the brakes. The ABS pulsed against my foot. Thud, 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 but we were sliding.
We had lost the road. The shoulder had collapsed. The SUV tilted 30 degrees, 45 degrees. Hold on! We slid sideways down the embankment. Branches whipped against the windows. The world spun. Slam. We hit something solid, a tree trunk. The airbags deployed. I sat there for a moment, stunned. The white dust from the airbag filled the cabin, mixing with the yellow fog outside. Kevin? I coughed. Kevin, you okay? I looked over. Kevin hadn't moved. The airbag had hit him, but he didn't look bruised. He looked calm. We stopped, he said simply. I tried to open my door, jammed against the dirt. We have to get out, I said. We're sitting ducks. I unbuckled. I crawled over the center console, pushing past the gear shift. Kevin, unbuckle, let's go. I can't, he whispered. Why? Are you hurt? No, I'm stuck. I leaned over. The vines, the ferns growing from his neck, they had extended during the crash. While we were driving, they had been dormant, but in the shock of the impact, they had reacted defensively. Thick green tendrils had shot out from his collar, wrapping around the headrest. They had woven into the fabric of the seat. He was anchored to the car. Oh, God, I whispered. I pulled out the scalpel, the one I had jammed into the console. Hold still. I'm going to cut them. No! Kevin shrank back. Don't! It'll hurt! It's hair, Kevin. It's just hair. It's nerves. I can feel the seat, Elias. I can feel the leather. It feels like holding hands. I didn't listen. I grabbed the thickest vine. It was warm. It pulsed under my fingers. I slashed. Kevin screamed. He arched his back, thrashing. Yellow sap sprayed from the cut vine, hitting me in the face. It burned like acid. I told you, he sobbed. I told you it connects. I wiped the sap from my eyes, blinking furiously. I'm sorry, Kev, but we can't stay here. I grabbed the scalpel again. I had to be fast, brutal. I hacked at the vines. 1, 2, 3. Kevin screamed with every cut, a raw human sound that tore my heart out. But the vines severed. They recoiled, whipping back like cut snakes. I grabbed his jacket and hauled him across the console. I kicked the passenger door open. It fell away. The hinges were broken from the impact. We tumbled out into the mud. We were in a ravine. The SUV was wedged against a massive moss-covered boulder. Above us, the road was a dark line 20 feet up. Around us, the jungle was waking up. They heard us, Kevin whimpered. He was clutching his neck, where the severed vines were oozing sap. They heard the car die. I shined my flashlight into the darkness. Eyes. Dozens of them. Not deer, not bears. Wolves. Or things that used to be wolves. They were sleek, hairless, their skin replaced by smooth black bark. Their jaws were split wide like flower petals, lined with thorns instead of teeth, and they were glowing, a soft, predatory blue. "Get up," I hissed. "I can't run, Elias. My legs feel heavy." I looked down. Kevin's jeans were ripped. His shins were turning into wood. The skin was hardening, turning brown and rigid. Lignification. He was taking root. I looked at the wolves. They were circling, closing the loop. I didn't have the rifle. It was in the back of the SUV, buried under the gear. I had a scalpel and a dislocated thumb. "Engineering solution," I muttered frantically. "Force multiplier." I looked at the SUV. The engine was dead, but the battery, the headlights were still on, bright, blinding. And the fuel tank had likely ruptured in the crash. I could smell the gasoline mixing with the pine and rot. "Kevin," I said, crouching beside him. "Can you walk, even a little?"
I think so, if you help me. Okay, we're gonna play a game. It's called Don't Look Back. I grabbed the road flare from my pocket. I had taken it from the survival kit in the generator shed. The wolves hissed. One of them lunged, snapping its pedal jaws just inches from my boot. I popped the flare. The wolves recoiled, screeching. The light hurt their sensitive fungal eyes. "Move!" I hoisted Kevin up. He was stiff, his legs moving like stilts. We stumbled away from the car, deeper into the ravine, following the creek bed. Behind us, the wolves rallied. They realized the light wasn't fire. They surged forward toward the SUV, sniffing the gasoline trail. I stopped at the bend, 30 yards away. "Sorry about the ride," I whispered. I turned and threw the flare. It arced through the air, a red comet in the yellow fog. It landed in the pool of gasoline beneath the wrecked Ford Expedition. The fireball lit up the canopy. The shockwave knocked us flat into the mud. The wolves that were investigating the car were vaporized. The ones on the perimeter were scattered, burning. I lay in the mud, ringing in my ears. Kevin was laughing. It was a wet, bubbling laugh. "Did you hear that?" he wheezed. "Hear what? The explosion?" "No," Kevin said, staring up at the burning canopy. "The forest. It screamed. It's afraid of you, Elias. You heard it. You really heard it." I rolled over and looked at him. The light from the fire illuminated his face. The moss on his cheek had spread. It covered his left eye now. "We have to keep moving," I said. "The fire will draw everything for miles." "I can't walk anymore, Elias. My feet, they're gone." I looked. His boots had split open. Roots, thick white tap roots, had burst through the leather, digging into the mud. He was anchoring. "No," I said. "No, no, no." I grabbed his arm. "Pull them out. We're going to the airfield." "Elias, pull them out!" I screamed at him. He tried. He gritted his teeth and pulled. The ground shifted. The roots held fast. "I'm home," Kevin whispered. Tears of golden sap leaked from his good eye. "It's okay. It's warm here." I stood there, covered in mud and blood, illuminated by the burning wreck of my getaway car. I couldn't cut him free. Not this time. The roots were too deep, and the forest was watching. I had to make a choice, leave him to become a garden, or... I looked at the scalpel in my hand. "You promised," Kevin said softly. "You promised you wouldn't let me be one of them." He looked at the knife. Then he looked at me. "Do it, Elias, before the music gets too loud." There is no engineering formula for this. There is no load calculation that tells you how much weight a soul can carry before it snaps. I knelt in the mud beside Kevin. The gold light in his eyes was fading, replaced by a dull, vegetative green. The moss on his face was moving, knitting together over his mouth, trying to silence him. "Do it," he choked out. One last burst of human will.
I gripped the scalpel. My hand was shaking so bad I thought I'd drop it. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry, Kevin." I didn't do it like a soldier. I didn't do it like a hero. I did it like a mechanic trying to fix a broken machine. I found the carotid artery, the pulse point I'd checked a dozen times in the last 2 days. I looked into his eyes. "Close them." He did. I pushed the blade in. It was quick. The blood that flowed out wasn't just red. It was streaked with amber sap. It didn't smell like iron. It smelled like cut grass and gasoline. Kevin's body convulsed once, then went slack. The tension in the roots anchoring his legs vanished. The forest seemed to sigh, a low, mournful wind rushing through the canopy. I sat there for a long time, just holding his hand. The vines around his legs didn't let go. Instead, they accelerated. Without his resistance, the colonization was instant. I watched as flowers bloomed from the wound in his neck, beautiful white lilies. He was a garden now. I stood up. I wiped the scalpel on my jeans. I put it in my pocket. I reached into his jacket and took the lighter and the pack of gum. "Rest," I told the mound of flowers. Then I turned my back on him. I turned my back on the wreck, on the fire, on the guilt. I looked west, towards Fairchild. "Walk," I commanded my legs. "Just walk." I walked for 2 days. I think it was 2 days. The sun never really came out. The yellow fog just lightened to a pale sulfur gray, then darkened to a bruised purple at night. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dr. Arrest screaming flowers. I saw Kevin smiling with moss in his teeth. I ate the gum, peppermint. It tasted like ash. I drank from rain puddles, filtering the water through my shirt. It probably wasn't enough. I could feel the spores itching in my throat. I coughed up yellow phlegm constantly. The solitude was heavy. It pressed on me. I started talking to the structures I passed. I passed a collapsed barn. "Truss failure," I mumbled to the rotting wood. "Should have used cross-bracing. Amateur work." I passed a cell tower, bent double like a wilted flower. "Tension overload. Cable snap. Poor wind shear calculation." It kept me grounded. Physics, math, the old gods. Around noon on the second day, the hallucinations started. I heard the music Kevin had talked about. It wasn't scary. That was the trap. It was comforting. It sounded like a lullaby. It promised rest. It promised that if I just lay down in the moss, the pain in my feet would stop. The hunger would stop. "No," I growled, slapping my own face. "I am a closed system. I do not integrate." I focused on the pain in my hand. My thumb was swollen, black and blue. My wrist slash was infected, throbbing with a fever beat. Pain is fuel. Pain is fuel. And then the fog broke. I came over a ridge. The trees here were burned, black skeletons standing in charcoal mud. Someone had bombed this area. Napalm? White phosphorus? The ground was scorched glass. No moss, no vines, just death. And beyond the blackened tree line, lights, geometry, perfect straight lines of sodium vapor orange. A runway, Fairchild Air Force Base. I fell to my knees. I wanted to cry, but I was too dehydrated. My body just shook dry heaves. It's real. It's actually real. It was a fortress. A massive perimeter wall had been erected, concrete barriers topped with 20 feet of chain link and razor wire. Guard towers stood every 100 yards, sweeping the kill zone with spotlights. I could hear the hum of engines, C-130s, helicopters, the sound of heavy machinery. Civilization, or what was left of it. I stood up. I dusted the ash off my knees. I checked my reflection in a puddle. I looked like a monster, covered in mud, blood, and sap, one arm cradled, eyes wild. They'll shoot me, I realized. I look like a host. I needed to look human. I needed to signal intent. I raised my good hand.
I walked out into the open, onto the scorched glass of the kill zone. I walked straight toward the main gate. "Halt! Unidentified individual! Halt immediately!" I stopped. I was 300 yards out. "I am human!" I screamed. My voice cracked, weak against the wind. "I am uninfected!" "Get on your knees! Hands on your head!" I dropped to my knees. I put my good hand on my head. A spotlight hit me, blinded me. I squinted against the glare. I saw movement on the wall. Snipers? Then the gate opened, just a crack. A vehicle rolled out, an MRAP, an armored troop carrier. It rumbled toward me, kicking up ash. It stopped 20 feet away. The turret gunner aimed a .50 caliber machine gun at my chest. The back door opened. 4 soldiers stepped out. They were wearing MOPP-4 gear, full chemical warfare suits, gas masks. They held rifles with flamethrower attachments. "Don't move," the lead soldier barked. His voice was muffled by the mask. "I'm not moving," I whispered. One of them approached me. He held a device, a scanner. He ran it over my body. Beep, beep, beep. "Thermal is normal," he shouted back to the MRAP. "No internal heat bloom. Spore count on clothing is high, but surface level only." The lead soldier lowered his rifle slightly. "Name?" "Elias. Fire lookout. Tower 4. "You walked from the ridge?" "Yes." "Alone?" I swallowed. "Yes, alone." The soldier looked at my arm, at the bloody bandage. "Bite mark?" "Self-inflicted. Scalpel. To escape restraints." The soldier paused. He seemed to be weighing the odds. "Clean him," he ordered. 2 soldiers blasted me with something cold and stinging, bleach solution. It burned my eyes, my cuts. I gritted my teeth and took it. It felt like penance. "Clear," the sprayer said. The lead soldier gestured to the MRAP. "Get in. You're lucky, Elias. We were about to seal the dates for the night." I climbed into the back of the armored truck. The metal bench was cold. The air inside smelled of filtered oxygen and gun oil. The door slammed shut. I was safe. But as the truck rumbled back toward the base, I looked at the soldier sitting opposite me. He had taken off his mask. He was young, tired. "Where are you taking me?" I asked. "Processing," he said. "Everyone gets processed, then assigned." "Assigned? Work detail, wall repair, hydroponics, or..." He looked at my hands. "You got skills?" "I'm a structural engineer." The soldier's eyebrows went up. "Engineer? Hell, Colonel Vance will want to see you personally. We've been trying to reinforce the runway foundation for weeks. The roots are pushing up the concrete." My heart sank. "The roots are here too?" The soldier sighed. He looked exhausted. "Man, the roots are everywhere. We aren't winning. We're just waiting." The truck stopped. "Welcome to Fairchild, last stop on Earth." I stepped out. We were in a massive hangar. It was bustling with activity. Refugees in orange jumpsuits were welding scrap metal onto trucks. Soldiers were reloading magazines. Doctors were triaging patients in tents. It looked like a colony. It looked like survival. But I looked at the floor. There were cracks in the concrete slab of the hangar floor, small hairline fractures, and growing out of one of them, a tiny single blade of purple grass. I stared at it. The base wasn't a fortress. It was a cage, and the infection was already inside. "Hey!" a soldier shouted, grabbing my arm. "Move it! Processing is this way!" I let them lead me away, but my mind was already working, already calculating.
The tower had failed. The mine had failed. The observatory was a trap. The base was compromised. There was no static defense against this. Walls didn't work. The Earth itself was the enemy. To survive, really survive, you couldn't stay on the ground. I looked at the C-130 Hercules parked in the center of the hangar. Big, powerful, capable of flight. And I looked at the fuel trucks. I put my hand in my pocket. I felt the scalpel. I felt Kevin's lighter. I'm an engineer, I whispered to myself. I solve problems. And I knew with absolute certainty what the final solution had to be. We couldn't beat the Verdance. We couldn't hide from it. We had to burn it all down. Colonel Vance was a man eroding. That's the engineer in me talking again. I looked at him behind his mahogany desk, a piece of furniture salvaged from some dead executive's office, and I saw a structure that had exceeded its load-bearing capacity. Structural engineer, Vance said, reading my file. He didn't look up. He was staring at a map of the airfield. Specialization in high-stress concrete and seismic retrofitting. Yes, sir, I said. I was clean now, wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. My hand was bandaged. I felt like a prisoner. They tell me you walked from Blackwood Ridge. Alone. Not alone. I started with a partner. He didn't make it. Vance finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked like he hadn't slept since the Tuesday the world ended. We're losing the runway, Elias. The roots, they're hydraulic jacks. They push up with thousands of pounds of pressure. We patch a crack in the morning, and by noon, it's a trench. We have 3 C-5 Galaxies fully loaded with refugees and personnel. If that runway breaks, they don't fly. Where are you flying them? Greenland. Thule Air Base. The ice sheet. It's too cold for the Verdance there. It's a clean slate. I walked over to the window. It overlooked the flight line. I saw the massive gray planes sitting on the tarmac. Floodlights bathed them in artificial daylight. Crews were frantically pumping fuel into their wings. But I also saw the landing gear. I squinted. The tires were muddy. The wheel wells were packed with debris from the takeoff roll of the previous flights. Colonel, I said quietly, have those planes been decontaminated? Exterior wash, yes, standard protocol. What about the intake manifolds, the wheel wells, the cargo holds? Vance rubbed his temples. We did what we could, son. The spore count in the air is rising exponentially. If we don't launch tonight, we don't launch. I turned back to him. If you fly those planes to Greenland, you aren't saving humanity. You're just being a crop duster. Vance slammed his hand on the desk. I don't need a biology lesson. I need a runway. Can you fix the concrete or not? I looked at the map on his desk. I looked at the cracks radiating from the center of the base. I can't fix the concrete, Colonel. The problem isn't the substrate. It's the subsoil. The roots are eating the soil underneath. The runway is floating on a vegetative ocean. Vance slumped back. The fight went out of him. We're dead, he whispered. We're all dead. No, I said, we're not dead. We're just planted. I looked at the fuel depot marked on the map. 2 massive tanks holding millions of gallons of JP-8 jet fuel. They were connected to the hydrant system that ran under the runway. I need to inspect the fuel pumps, I lied. If the vibration from the pumps is agitating the roots, I might be able to dampen it. Buy you a few hours. Vance waved his hand dismissively. He pulled a bottle of whiskey from his drawer. Go. Take a badge. Do whatever you want. It doesn't matter anymore. I took the badge. I walked out of the office. I didn't go to the pumps to dampen the vibration. I went to end the argument. I walked past the lines of refugees. They looked terrified, clutching their bags, staring at the planes like they were chariots to heaven. They didn't know. They didn't know that Kevin was already in the cargo hold. Not physically, but the idea of him. The infection. The spores clinging to their boots, deep in their lungs, waiting for the thaw in Greenland. I reached the fuel depot. It was unguarded. Everyone was at the planes. I swiped the badge. Beep, click, the gate opened. I stood before the main manifold, a complex array of pipes and valves that controlled the flow of fuel to the entire base. I touched the cold steel. Engineering solution, I whispered. Sterilization.
I didn't just want to stop the planes. I wanted to kill the roots beneath the concrete. I wanted to burn the infection out of the soil. I started turning valves. Squeak, groan. I bypassed the safety regulators. I opened the pressure release valves on the main tanks. I redirected the flow not to the hydrants, but to the overflow vents, right onto the tarmac. JP8 poured out onto the concrete. It flooded the ground, soaking into the cracks where the purple grass was growing. It seeped down, deep down, seeking the roots. I stood in the middle of the rising pool of fuel. My boots were soaked. I pulled out Kevin's lighter. I thought about the tower, the silence, the clean air. I thought about the deer, the bear, the lab. I thought about Kevin's smile as the moss took his eyes. "Elias!" A voice behind me. I turned. It was Colonel Vance. He had come out to the balcony of the command tower. He was looking down at me, holding a megaphone. "What are you doing? You'll kill us all!" "I'm saving you!" I screamed back. "I'm grounding the fleet. We don't get to leave, Colonel. We broke this world. We stay in it." "Security, stop him!" Soldiers started running toward me from the flight line. I looked at the lighter. A cheap plastic Bic lighter, blue. The fuel was rising. It was washing over my ankles. "Kevin," I whispered, "you liked the music, but I prefer the fire." I flicked the wheel. Snick, spark, snick, spark. The soldiers were 50 yards away. "Don't do it!" I looked up at the night sky. The clouds were heavy with spores. Let there be light. I dropped the lighter. The world turned white. The heat was instantaneous. It wasn't pain, it was erasure. I saw the fuel catch. I saw the wall of fire race across the tarmac faster than the soldiers could run. I saw it hit the C5 Galaxies. Boom! The planes exploded, massive fireballs rolling into the sky, consuming the hope of escape. But the real work was happening below. The fuel had soaked into the cracks. The fire followed it. The ground shook, not from an earthquake, but from the screams of the roots. I felt the concrete buckle beneath me. The Verdance deep underground was burning. The network was dying. I fell backward into the heat. I didn't feel the fire consuming me. I just felt clean. The music stopped. The whispering stopped. Finally, silence.